When talented black chef Leonardo lands a job at a prestigious restaurant, he believes it's his big break. But he soon encounters subtle yet deep-rooted racism among his colleagues and superiors. As he fights for his rights, his decision leads to unexpected consequences for everyone involved. Don't go anywhere, the best is yet to come. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and tell us if this story of courage and honesty resonates with you. And be sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an inspiring story. Chapter 1: A New Opportunity. Leonardo Brooks could feel his pulse quicken as he stepped into the elegant lobby of Bellamy's, one of the city's most prestigious restaurants. A black chef who had worked his way up from a small, family-owned eatery on the edge of town, he had spent years perfecting his craft. From smoky barbecue flavors to vibrant Caribbean spices, his style was unique, drawing on his heritage and passion. And now, as Bellamy's new head chef, he felt his life's work had finally paid off. This was more than just a job. It was the opportunity to showcase his culinary vision on the grandest stage the city had to offer. The restaurant was nothing short of impressive. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over dark mahogany floors, and pristine white tablecloths, where polished silverware gleamed under soft lighting. Bellamy's catered to the elite, socialites, celebrities, high-powered executives, and, occasionally, even a politician or two. Leonardo had heard about the restaurant's reputation long before he had even set foot in its doors, but he never imagined he would one day be leading its kitchen. As he made his way to the kitchen, his thoughts drifted back to his roots. Growing up, he had learned the art of cooking from his grandmother, who had taught him the secrets of using spices and the importance of cooking from the heart. It was those memories that had fueled his passion, pushing him to take bold steps in his culinary journey. And now, here he was, ready to bring those flavors to Bellamy's tables. When he entered the kitchen, he was met with a flurry of activity. Chefs in crisp white coats moved in sync, chopping, stirring, and plating with the precision of a well-oiled machine. The head manager, Charles Whitman, a stern, middle-aged man with a perfectly trimmed mustache and a watchful gaze, introduced him to the team. While some offered polite greetings, others eyed him with cool indifference, sizing him up. He noticed that most of the staff were used to a strict, traditional style of French cooking, and his presence, with his vibrant and innovative approach, seemed to unsettle them. Charles cleared his throat. "Everyone, this is Chef Leonardo Brooks, our new head chef. He brings a unique approach to the kitchen, and I expect everyone to work together and welcome his ideas." His tone was formal, almost reluctant, as if unsure of what unique approach might mean. Leonardo could feel the weight of their gazes on him, a mix of curiosity and reservation. He smiled and offered a friendly nod, determined to earn their respect. But something about the atmosphere felt stiff. It was the sous chef, Peter, a tall man with piercing blue eyes and a subtle smirk, who finally broke the silence. "So, Chef Brooks," he began, drawing out the name with a slight edge, "we're curious to see if your unique approach will fit Bellamy's standards." The words were polite enough, but Leonardo caught the tone, the hint of challenge beneath the surface. Leonardo met Peter's gaze with calm confidence. "I'm here to build on the restaurant's reputation," he replied, "and maybe add a little something new." He noticed the slight frown on Charles's face, as if the idea of something new was unwelcome. As the day wore on, Leonardo found himself being subtly tested. Every time he offered a suggestion, like adding a hint of Caribbean spice to a dish or introducing a creative twist on a classic sauce, the team reacted with polite nods and murmurs but rarely followed through with enthusiasm. Charles remained stoic, his eyes watching Leonardo's every move, as if he were silently assessing every seasoning, every technique, every word. Despite this, Leonardo was undeterred. He knew his flavors were bold, perhaps bolder than Bellamy's clientele were used to. But he also knew that he had a talent for harmonizing flavors, for making something extraordinary from the simplest ingredients. He had brought his own secret spice blends and handwritten recipe book, a legacy of his family's cooking traditions, and he was determined to make them shine. As he left the restaurant that evening, Leonardo felt a mix of excitement and unease. He had felt this way before, whenever he walked into a kitchen where he wasn't entirely welcomed. He had learned to recognize the quiet skepticism in people's eyes, the tension that filled the room when he offered something different from the norm. And yet, this place was different. Bellamy's had always been his dream, but he was beginning to wonder if they were truly ready to accept him and his vision. Outside, he took a deep breath, looking up at the towering building and the Bellamy sign glowing softly in the evening light. This was his opportunity, but something told him it would be a difficult road ahead. Little did he know that this job would test not only his skills but also his resilience, forcing him to confront challenges that went far beyond cooking. As he walked away from the restaurant that night, he felt a quiet determination rise within him. He wasn't going to let anything, or anyone, hold him back from showing the world what he could do. Chapter 2: Hidden Prejudices. In the following days, Leonardo tried to settle into his role as head chef, but something felt off. Each morning, as he walked into Bellamy's bustling kitchen, he felt the subtle, icy reception from his team. The other chefs were polite on the surface, but he couldn't shake the sense of discomfort that lingered in their sidelong glances and whispered conversations that stopped abruptly whenever he entered the room. Even though he held the title of head chef, he sensed that some of the team saw him as an outsider who didn't belong. Leonardo had always felt at home in the kitchen. From an early age, he'd learned that food could be a bridge between cultures, a language everyone understood. But here, at Bellamy's, it felt more like a fortress with locked doors. His every suggestion or decision seemed to be questioned. Recipes he proposed, like incorporating smoky barbecue elements or a hint of tropical spices to enhance familiar dishes, were met with hesitation. Each time he introduced an idea, Charles Whitman, the manager, would politely nod and say, "Interesting," before steering the conversation back to more traditional ingredients and techniques. The team meetings quickly became a source of frustration for Leonardo. He would sit down with his sous chefs, sharing his ideas for the week's specials, hoping to infuse a bit of his cultural background into Bellamy's cuisine. But his enthusiasm often fizzled as the others nodded along, only to later tweak or reject his suggestions entirely. Peter, the sous chef, was especially dismissive, making remarks about Leonardo's creative style that veiled sharp disapproval. One evening, Leonardo proposed a dish inspired by his grandmother's recipes, a seared sea bass with a coconut and lemongrass reduction, served with a side of smoky plantain puree. He knew it was bold, but he believed it could introduce Bellamy's patrons to a unique, memorable flavor. As he described the dish, Peter raised an eyebrow and exchanged a look with one of the junior chefs. "Interesting concept, Chef Brooks," Peter said with a slight smirk. "But do you think our clientele would, go for something so exotic?" Leonardo forced a polite smile, feeling a familiar irritation build. "Bellamy's is known for offering memorable dining experiences, isn't it? I think it's worth taking the chance." Charles, who had been listening quietly, cleared his throat. "I appreciate your ambition, Leonardo, but Bellamy's has a long-standing tradition. Our guests have certain expectations." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Perhaps we should aim to meet those expectations before venturing into uncharted territory." The words lingered in the air, stinging more than Leonardo cared to admit. He could feel the weight of the implication. Bellamy's, it seemed, wasn't as open to his culinary creativity as he had hoped. It was as if the restaurant wanted the benefits of his talent and innovation without allowing him the freedom to fully express it. As the meeting ended, Leonardo was left with a bitter realization. He was expected to uphold Bellamy's standards, but those standards didn't seem to include anything that represented him. Over the following days, the subtle undercurrents of prejudice became more apparent. When the kitchen was especially busy, he noticed that the line chefs deferred to Peter rather than himself, even though Leonardo held the highest position. If he gave an instruction, there was often a pause, a moment of hesitation, before anyone followed through. Peter seemed to encourage it, issuing his own directives in a way that subtly undermined Leonardo's authority. In private, Leonardo tried to address these issues with Charles, explaining that he felt some resistance from the team. But Charles was dismissive, brushing off Leonardo's concerns with a vague reassurance. Give it time, chef. The team just needs to adjust to your style, he said. Bellamy's has always had a specific rhythm, a certain discipline. Our chefs aren't used to something so different. One night, after an especially grueling shift, Leonardo overheard two chefs whispering in the back hallway. They were discussing his background, making quiet but pointed remarks about how Bellamy's used to be a certain type of place and that standards seemed to be slipping. The words cut deep, but Leonardo swallowed his anger, knowing that reacting would only reinforce their bias. He had faced prejudice before, but here it was different. It was hidden, layered beneath professionalism and politeness, a subtle dismissal that was harder to fight against. In moments like these, he found himself thinking back to his grandmother, who had taught him to stay proud and grounded no matter where he was. Her words echoed in his mind, "Let your work speak for you. People can doubt your place, but they can't deny your talent." He clung to this wisdom as he faced the quiet resistance around him, determined to rise above it. But as the weeks went on, Leonardo's frustration grew. He knew he was fighting not just for respect, but for the right to express himself and his heritage in a space that claimed to value talent and innovation. The subtle prejudice, the dismissive remarks, the resistance to change, it all added up, chipping away at his patience. And deep down, he felt a quiet anger begin to simmer. He knew that proving himself here would require more than skill. It would demand resilience, courage, and perhaps, a battle he hadn't anticipated. Chapter 3: The First Mistake. It was a busy Friday night at Bellamy's, and the restaurant buzzed with energy. Every table was reserved, and the line in the kitchen moved with clockwork precision. Leonardo, focused and calm under pressure, was in his element. This was the part of the job he loved, the rush, the rhythm, the satisfaction of seeing beautifully crafted dishes leaving the kitchen. Tonight's menu was especially ambitious, featuring a few of his original ideas subtly woven into Bellamy's classic French-inspired repertoire. He had introduced a dish with a subtle twist, a tender duck breast with a hibiscus glaze and a hint of allspice, a bold move, but he had been careful to keep it balanced and sophisticated. As orders rolled in, Leonardo noticed that several guests were ordering the duck dish. It was an opportunity for him to showcase his talent, and he felt proud knowing his creation was a hit. However, as he prepared each plate, he sensed the tension in the kitchen. The sous chef, Peter, stood nearby, watching him with a cold, scrutinizing gaze, muttering instructions to the line cooks and hovering over them as they worked on Leonardo's dish. There was an unusual air of intensity tonight, one that made Leonardo feel like he was constantly being watched, his every movement judged. Then, halfway through the rush, disaster struck. As the next plate of duck breast was about to be finished, Leonardo noticed that something was wrong with the sauce. The hibiscus glaze was missing its signature depth of color, and the aroma wasn't right. He tasted a small spoonful, his heart sinking as the overly bitter and flat flavor hit his tongue. Somehow, the sauce had been made with too much allspice and not enough hibiscus, throwing off the balance he had worked so carefully to achieve. Quickly, he called over one of the line chefs, asking if they had prepared the reduction according to his specifications. The chef, looking nervous, glanced over at Peter before answering, I just followed what was laid out, chef." Leonardo was taken aback. The ingredients were supposed to have been prepared precisely, yet something clearly had gone wrong. He could feel the seconds ticking away, the pressure mounting as waitstaff lined up to collect the next round of dishes. With no time to make a fresh batch of sauce, Leonardo did his best to salvage the dish, hoping it would still meet the restaurant's high standards. But the damage had already been done. Moments later, a server rushed into the kitchen, his expression anxious. "Chef, one of the guests sent back the duck. They said the flavor was odd." The server's eyes shifted uncomfortably to Peter and then back to Leonardo, as if anticipating trouble. Leonardo's stomach dropped. He took a deep breath, preparing to handle the issue calmly, but before he could respond, Peter stepped in, shaking his head with an exaggerated sigh. "I knew this would happen," he muttered, loud enough for the team to hear. "I told you this hibiscus and allspice thing was too risky for Bellamy's. We have a reputation to uphold." Leonardo felt his pulse quicken, a quiet anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. He looked at Peter, his voice steady. "Mistakes happen, Peter. It's the kitchen. We can make adjustments and keep going." Peter smirked, his tone dripping with condescension. "It's not just a small mistake, Leonardo. This isn't one of those experimental kitchens. Here, consistency is everything. Maybe you're too used to creative cooking, but Bellamy's clients expect a certain standard." The comment hit hard, and Leonardo could feel the weight of the staff's eyes on him, some wide-eyed, others with barely hidden smirks. Charles, who had been watching from the corner of the kitchen, finally stepped forward, his face as unreadable as ever. "Leonardo," he said, his voice cool and detached, "we'll need to discuss this after the shift." As Leonardo nodded, maintaining his composure, he noticed Peter's self-satisfied expression. He understood in that moment that this mistake had been more than an unfortunate accident, it was a setup. Someone had deliberately altered the ingredients to sabotage his dish. The realization burned, but he knew he couldn't afford to react impulsively. The kitchen was not a place for arguments, especially not tonight. Pushing aside his frustration, he continued with the shift, doing everything he could to ensure every plate met his standards. But the mood in the kitchen had shifted, a silent tension hanging in the air. Each chef seemed more focused on their work, yet there was a palpable sense of unease as they glanced at him, whispering when he wasn't looking. By the end of the night, Leonardo felt drained. After the last dish was served and the last pan washed, Charles approached him in the empty kitchen. His arms were crossed, and his expression was grim. "Leonardo, we can't afford slip-ups like this at Bellamy's. Our clientele expects the best." Leonardo met Charles's gaze, choosing his words carefully. "I understand, Charles. But I suspect that the ingredients weren't prepared according to my specifications." Charles raised an eyebrow, his tone dismissive. "Leonardo, are you suggesting sabotage? This is a professional kitchen. I expect accountability, not excuses." Leonardo's jaw tightened, but he held back the urge to argue. It was clear that Charles wasn't interested in hearing his side. The mistake had served as an excuse to undermine his credibility, and Charles seemed all too willing to place the blame squarely on him. As Leonardo left the restaurant that night, he felt a heavy weight pressing on his shoulders. The realization settled in, he was up against more than just a kitchen mistake, he was facing a deeper, hidden prejudice within the team, one that would take more than talent and hard work to overcome. He resolved to be cautious, but his resolve hardened as he promised himself that he wouldn't let anyone or anything drive him out. This was his opportunity, and he was determined to fight for it, no matter the obstacles in his path. Chapter 4: The Taste Test. After weeks of tension and a string of subtle but constant challenges from his colleagues, Leonardo decided it was time to take a bold step. If he was ever going to earn his place in Bellamy's kitchen, he needed to show the entire staff, and especially the skeptical management, that his unique culinary style wasn't just different, but also deserving of respect. And so, he proposed a special night, an exclusive taste test menu that would feature his signature dishes, infused with flavors from his heritage and his vision. When Leonardo brought the idea to Charles, he could see the hesitation in the manager's eyes. Charles was skeptical of anything that deviated from Bellamy's traditional French cuisine, and an entire tasting menu inspired by unconventional flavors was a gamble he clearly didn't want to take. "I don't know, Leonardo," Charles said, his voice tinged with doubt. "Our guests come here for consistency, for refinement. Bellamy's has a reputation that's been carefully built. Are you sure your, let's say, distinctive approach is right for this setting?" Leonardo took a steadying breath, keeping his gaze calm and confident. "Charles, I'm asking for one night. Just one opportunity to show what I can bring to Bellamy's. I've seen the responses to some of my dishes, the comments guests have made. This could give the restaurant something fresh, something unforgettable." After a long silence, Charles finally gave a reluctant nod. "Fine. But only one night, and we'll keep it small. A private event for a few carefully chosen guests." With that, the date was set for the following Friday. Leonardo's heart raced with excitement and nerves. He would have one shot to prove himself, one night to showcase his food at Bellamy's. This was his chance to make a lasting impression. As the night of the taste test approached, Leonardo poured every ounce of creativity and skill into planning the menu. Each dish was a tribute to his journey as a chef, blending refined French techniques with Caribbean spices and Southern soul. The menu opened with a creamy corn and coconut bisque, followed by a blackened scallop with mango lime glaze and a touch of cayenne. For the main course, he prepared a coffee-rubbed lamb served with roasted plantain puree and a sauce infused with dark chocolate and smoked paprika, flavors he knew would be entirely new to Bellamy's diners. He rounded off the evening with a rich bread pudding made with rum-soaked raisins and spiced caramel sauce, a dessert inspired by his grandmother's recipe. On the night of the event, Leonardo could feel the tension and curiosity as he moved through the kitchen. The staff, including Peter and the other chefs who had questioned his abilities, were watching closely. He knew they were waiting to see if his dishes would fall flat or live up to the hype. But Leonardo pushed aside his nerves, focusing on the food and the process he knew so well. He could only hope that the guests would see the vision and the passion behind each dish. As the first course was plated, Leonardo noticed Catherine Bellamy herself enter the dining area. This was unexpected. The restaurant's owner was known for her rare appearances. Seeing her there, mingling with the guests and taking her seat, filled him with both excitement and pressure. She had been relatively hands-off with the restaurant's day-to-day operations, trusting Charles to keep things running smoothly. But tonight, she was here, and Leonardo knew he had to deliver something extraordinary. The first course was served, and as Leonardo watched through the kitchen window, he observed the diners take their first bites. He could see some brows raise, some subtle smiles, and even the occasional nod of approval. A waiter approached him with a quiet message, "They're really enjoying it, chef." Mrs. Bellamy just asked if the next course could be served with an extra side of that mango lime glaze. Hearing that, Leonardo felt a wave of relief and pride. The diners were intrigued, maybe even delighted. As each dish was served, he could feel the atmosphere in the dining room shift. It was no longer the predictable, quiet affair Bellamy's was known for. Instead, there was a buzz, a sense of excitement as each new course arrived, surprising and challenging the diners in ways they hadn't anticipated. By the time the main course was served, Catherine Bellamy herself asked to speak with Leonardo. The waiter passed along her request, and Leonardo took a deep breath, composing himself before walking into the dining area. Mrs. Bellamy, elegant and composed, stood and extended her hand. "Chef Brooks," she said with a warm smile. "This meal has been remarkable. I don't usually get surprises here at Bellamy's, and tonight has been a delightful exception. Your creativity and boldness, it's impressive." Leonardo smiled, feeling a genuine pride swell within him. "Thank you, Mrs. Bellamy. I wanted to bring something different, something memorable. I'm glad you enjoyed it." The guests applauded, and Leonardo returned to the kitchen with a sense of triumph. But as he approached his station, he noticed Peter standing off to the side, his arms crossed, a hard look in his eyes. Peter's expression told him everything he needed to know. Success tonight didn't mean acceptance. When the night came to a close, Charles gathered the staff in the kitchen, his face expressionless as he addressed Leonardo in front of everyone. "Tonight was well received," he began slowly. "But remember, Bellamy's has a certain reputation. Let's be careful not to let one night give us illusions about changing what we do here." Leonardo's heart sank as he realized that, despite the success, he was still seen as an outsider with an experimental style that didn't quite belong. The praise he had earned from Mrs. Bellamy and the guests seemed hollow under Charles's thinly veiled criticism. Peter's smirk grew as Charles dismissed the staff. "See? You might get lucky with a few dishes, but this isn't the place for novelty," he said as he walked past Leonardo. Standing alone in the empty kitchen, Leonardo understood that the taste test had been a victory, but it hadn't won him the acceptance or respect he'd hoped for. He would have to prove himself again and again. But he knew, despite the obstacles, that he had something they couldn't ignore. And no matter what, he wasn't done fighting. Chapter 5: A New Ally. After the success of the taste test, Leonardo hoped that his hard work would begin to break down the resistance he faced from his colleagues. But the quiet hostility only grew more pronounced. Although Mrs. Bellamy had praised his work publicly, Charles and Peter continued to dismiss his contributions, subtly reinforcing the divide between him and the rest of the staff. Leonardo was beginning to feel more isolated than ever, his confidence waning as each day seemed to present new challenges. It was during a particularly tense evening that Leonardo met Sarah, a server who had been working at Bellamy's for a few years. Petite and sharp-eyed, Sarah moved through the dining room with quiet grace, knowing exactly how to handle the demands of high-profile guests. She had seen everything: the drama, the hidden rivalries, and the unspoken hierarchy of the restaurant. Although they hadn't spoken much before, Sarah had observed the way Leonardo was treated in the kitchen. She had noticed the dismissive comments, the silent glares, and the way the kitchen crew often acted as though Leonardo wasn't part of the team. After the dinner rush had died down, Sarah caught Leonardo in the hallway outside the kitchen as he was cleaning up for the night. She approached him cautiously, glancing over her shoulder to make sure no one was listening. "Chef Brooks," she began softly, "can I talk to you for a minute?" Leonardo looked up, surprised by her sudden approach. "Of course, Sarah. What's on your mind?" She hesitated, then took a deep breath, as if preparing to say something she had been holding back. "I just wanted to say I've been watching how things have been going around here. And I think it's unfair, the way they're treating you." Leonardo blinked, caught off guard by her honesty. "You noticed that too?" Sarah nodded, her face serious. "It's obvious to anyone paying attention. The way Charles and Peter talk about you, the way they act when you're around, it's like they're threatened by you or something. They keep acting like your ideas are out of place, like they don't fit Bellamy's, but I've seen how the guests react to your dishes. They love them." Leonardo felt a surge of relief hearing someone else acknowledge what he'd been going through. "Thank you, Sarah. It's been difficult, to say the least. I've been trying to find a way to connect, to prove myself, but no matter what I do, it feels like I'm hitting a wall." Sarah looked around, lowering her voice. "Look, I don't usually get involved in this kind of thing, but there's something you should know. There's been talk among the staff. People are saying that Charles is purposely undermining you. I overheard him talking to Peter a few days ago. They were discussing ways to keep the menu consistent, which is their way of saying they want to keep you from making any real changes." Leonardo felt his jaw tighten. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed by someone else made his frustration boil over. "I knew they were pushing back, but I didn't realize it was this deliberate." "It is," Sarah said, nodding. "They've even had meetings about it, without inviting you. The things they say, well, it's pretty clear they don't want someone like you making a name for himself here." Leonardo clenched his fists, fighting to keep his expression neutral. "I appreciate you telling me this, Sarah. It helps to know I'm not imagining things." She looked him in the eye, her gaze steady. "You're not. And I want to help if I can. This restaurant could use the change you're trying to bring. Honestly, we all could." They spent the next few minutes discussing potential ways to push his ideas forward, despite the resistance from management. Sarah suggested that they could discreetly introduce new elements to his dishes on nights when Charles wasn't around, small touches that would showcase Leonardo's style without drawing too much attention. Sarah's experience on the floor was invaluable. She knew the guests' preferences and understood how to introduce new flavors in a way that wouldn't feel abrupt or out of place. As they talked, Leonardo realized that Sarah's support was more than just practical. It was the first real connection he had felt with someone in the restaurant. Her willingness to help, even at a potential risk to her own job, meant more to him than he could express. In her, he saw an ally, someone who understood that true excellence in cuisine came from diversity and boldness, not from rigid adherence to tradition. Together, they devised a plan. On evenings when Charles wasn't in the restaurant, they would subtly introduce some of Leonardo's ideas into the menu. Nothing too drastic, just hints of the unique flavors he wanted to bring to Bellamy's. Sarah agreed to gather feedback from guests, using her natural charm to encourage them to be honest about their dining experiences. This way, Leonardo would have concrete feedback to show that his flavors resonated with the patrons. Over the next few weeks, Sarah became an invaluable ally, slipping into the kitchen during her shifts to give Leonardo updates on guests' reactions. She would occasionally bring him handwritten notes with feedback, often relaying enthusiastic comments from diners who found the new flavors refreshing. Slowly, a sense of hope began to replace Leonardo's frustration. For the first time since he had started working at Bellamy's, he felt like he had a real chance to prove himself. But he knew they had to be careful. As their collaboration grew, Leonardo noticed Peter watching him more closely, often lingering in the kitchen even when his shift was over. It was clear that Peter suspected something, and Leonardo and Sarah had to be vigilant to avoid drawing attention. They exchanged quick, meaningful glances, communicating silently whenever they thought Peter or another chef might be listening. Despite the risks, their small acts of defiance gave Leonardo a renewed sense of purpose. Every time a guest complimented his dish, every time Sarah handed him a note filled with praise, it reminded him of why he had become a chef in the first place. He was here to create, to challenge, to introduce people to flavors they'd never experienced before. And now, with Sarah by his side, he felt more determined than ever to make his mark, even if it meant continuing their covert mission. By the end of the chapter, Leonardo realized that this was just the beginning of a larger battle. But he was no longer alone. With Sarah's support, he knew that together, they could begin to shift the culture at Bellamy's, one carefully placed dish at a time. Chapter 6: The Secret Ingredient. With Sarah's help, Leonardo had begun to make subtle changes to Bellamy's menu, weaving in flavors that reflected his unique culinary style. Each night, he introduced a small but significant touch, a hint of smoked paprika here, a dash of plantain puree there. Elements that added layers to the dishes without altering them so drastically that they would catch Charles or Peter's immediate attention. But even these small victories left Leonardo wanting more. He needed a way to showcase his full range, to let the patrons experience his true vision. Then, one afternoon while preparing for the dinner shift, inspiration struck. Leonardo remembered a unique spice blend that had been a staple in his grandmother's kitchen. She called it her sunset blend, a mix of dried hibiscus, Scotch bonnet, allspice, and a touch of cocoa powder. It was a family recipe that transformed every dish it touched, imbuing it with warmth, depth, and a flavor that lingered on the palate long after the meal was over. Leonardo knew that if he could introduce this blend, he could bring an unforgettable experience to Bellamy's guests, something they couldn't find anywhere else. That evening, Leonardo stayed late, carefully preparing the sunset blend in the privacy of the empty kitchen. The fragrance filled the air as he ground the spices together, each one reminding him of home, of Sunday dinners spent around a crowded table filled with laughter and stories. As he bottled the blend, he felt a surge of pride and a renewed sense of purpose. This was his heritage, his story in a jar, and he would make sure Bellamy's patrons got to taste it. The next day, Leonardo found Sarah and shared his plan. "I want to add this spice blend to tonight's special, the lamb dish," he said, holding out the small jar. Sarah unscrewed the lid and inhaled deeply, her eyes lighting up. "This smells incredible, Leo," she said, a grin spreading across her face. "I've never smelled anything like it. The guests are going to love this." "But we need to be careful," Leonardo cautioned. "We can't let Charles or Peter catch on, not until we have proof that the guests are responding well." Sarah nodded, her expression serious. "I'll keep an eye on them, and I'll make sure to gather feedback. Don't worry, we'll keep this between us." That night, Leonardo carefully seasoned the lamb with the sunset blend. The fragrance filled the kitchen, drawing curious glances from the other chefs, who muttered among themselves but didn't say anything aloud. Leonardo could feel the tension in the room as he plated each dish with precision, placing a smear of spiced plantain puree beside the lamb and finishing it off with a hint of hibiscus glaze. As the first plates went out, Sarah watched the diners closely, subtly engaging them in conversation as they tasted Leonardo's creation. She returned to the kitchen with a smile, passing Leonardo a quick thumbs up. "They're loving it," she whispered as she breezed past him, her excitement barely contained. Over the next hour, the kitchen began to buzz with unexpected orders for the lamb dish. Word had spread through the dining room, and more patrons were requesting it, intrigued by the special flavor they had heard about from nearby tables. Leonardo felt a thrill of satisfaction as each plate left the kitchen. The sunset blend was doing its magic, leaving an impression that lingered in each diner's memory. But as the orders piled up, Leonardo noticed Peter's suspicious gaze following him. Peter approached under the pretense of inspecting the line and, with a smirk, asked, "What's in the lamb tonight, Chef Brooks?" "Smells different." Leonardo kept his tone even, hiding any hint of worry. "Just a small twist. Wanted to try something a little unique for tonight's special." Peter raised an eyebrow, his smirk fading into a scowl. "Let's not get too carried away. You know Bellamy's is about consistency, not experimentation." Leonardo held his gaze, refusing to back down. "Consistency and excellence aren't mutually exclusive, Peter." Peter scoffed and walked off, muttering something under his breath. But Leonardo wasn't about to let Peter's attitude ruin what had been a successful night. He focused on his work, pushing through the rest of the service with renewed determination. By the end of the night, Sarah returned to the kitchen with a slip of paper in her hand, her face glowing. "Leo, you have to see this. I asked a few guests to leave written comments on the lamb dish." She handed him the paper, which was filled with enthusiastic remarks. "Best lamb I've ever tasted. The spices were perfect, unforgettable. Please keep this on the menu." Leonardo's chest swelled with pride as he read each comment. This was the validation he had been waiting for, proof that his style had a place in Bellamy's. He carefully folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket, knowing that he would need it as evidence if he ever had to defend his choices to Charles. But the night wasn't over yet. As Leonardo and Sarah cleaned up, they were interrupted by the unexpected arrival of Catherine Bellamy herself. She entered the kitchen, her eyes scanning the room until they settled on Leonardo. She smiled and approached him, holding out her hand. "Chef Brooks," she began warmly, "I had the lamb tonight. I must say, it was extraordinary. The flavors were unlike anything I've had here before." "What was that spice?" Leonardo hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. "It's a blend I make myself, Mrs. Bellamy. Something inspired by my family's recipes." Her eyes sparkled with interest. "Well, it was a remarkable addition. You've given me something to think about, Chef. Perhaps Bellamy's could benefit from a bit more of your unique touch." As she left, Leonardo felt a surge of triumph. Mrs. Bellamy herself had praised his work, acknowledging the potential of his approach. For a moment, he allowed himself to hope that things might finally be changing. But as he looked across the kitchen, he caught sight of Peter standing by the doorway, his face dark with resentment. Leonardo knew that tonight's success would not sit well with him or Charles. The secret ingredient had brought him a step closer to acceptance, but it had also made him a bigger target. With the paper of glowing reviews tucked safely in his pocket and the taste of victory fresh on his mind, Leonardo prepared himself for what he knew would be the biggest challenge yet. He wasn't just fighting for his place in the kitchen anymore, he was fighting for the right to cook on his own terms. And he wasn't going to let anyone take that from him. Chapter 7: The Reveal. The week following the success of Leonardo's Sunset Blend was tense. Though Mrs. Bellamy herself had complimented the dish, Leonardo knew that Charles and Peter weren't pleased. The envious looks from Peter and the frosty, tight-lipped meetings with Charles told Leonardo that his success had stirred up more than admiration, it had deepened the silent animosity simmering in Bellamy's kitchen. By Friday evening, Leonardo could sense something brewing. Charles had called a meeting after dinner service, which was unusual. As the last plates were cleared and the kitchen wound down, Leonardo noticed a tense silence filling the room. The staff looked uncomfortable, exchanging wary glances. Sarah, who had been Leonardo's confidant and ally, shot him a look filled with quiet concern. She whispered to him as they gathered by the prep table, "Be careful tonight, Leo. Something feels off." Just then, Charles entered, his expression unreadable but his gaze hard. He held a folder, thick with documents, and his steps echoed in the quiet kitchen. Peter trailed behind him, his usual smirk replaced with a look of smug anticipation. Charles cleared his throat and began, his voice icily formal. "Tonight, I wanted to address some concerning issues that have come to my attention," he said, his eyes fixing on Leonardo. "It appears that certain unauthorized changes have been made to Bellamy's menu over the past few weeks. I've reviewed customer feedback and recipe adjustments, and I believe these changes have been implemented without proper approval." Leonardo's stomach dropped. He knew exactly what Charles was referring to, the small touches he had added to the dishes, the signature flavors that had won over diners. But these weren't random changes, they were carefully crafted enhancements he believed in. He took a steadying breath, determined not to let Charles intimidate him. "Charles, the changes I made were subtle but well received," Leonardo said, keeping his voice steady. "Mrs. Bellamy herself complimented the lamb with the sunset blend. Our guests have responded positively." Charles narrowed his eyes, ignoring Leonardo's mention of Mrs. Bellamy's approval. "You may think you know what's best, Leonardo, but Bellamy's is a place of tradition. We don't bend our standards to please whims, especially ones that might alienate our loyal clientele." Leonardo felt a rush of anger but forced himself to stay calm. "This isn't about lowering standards. It's about adding something unique, something that resonates with our guests. I've seen the feedback myself." Peter interjected, crossing his arms. "Look, Chef Brooks, you may have impressed a few patrons, but Bellamy's isn't a test kitchen. We don't experiment here for the sake of flavor diversity. It's reckless." Leonardo's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, a quiet voice cut through the tension. "Actually, I think we should hear what Chef Brooks has to say." Everyone turned to see Mrs. Bellamy standing in the doorway. She had arrived quietly, unnoticed, and her gaze was fixed firmly on Leonardo. Her presence sent a ripple of surprise through the kitchen. Even Charles looked momentarily flustered but quickly composed himself. "Mrs. Bellamy," Charles said, forcing a smile, "I didn't realize you'd be joining us tonight." Mrs. Bellamy waved a hand dismissively. "I like to stay informed, Charles. Especially when it concerns the reputation of my restaurant." She looked to Leonardo, her expression encouraging. "Chef Brooks, please continue." Leonardo felt a surge of gratitude and took a step forward, facing his colleagues with renewed confidence. "Thank you, Mrs. Bellamy. Over the past few weeks, I've introduced some small but carefully chosen flavors to Bellamy's dishes. My goal wasn't to replace the restaurant style, but to enhance it. I wanted to offer our guests something memorable, something that speaks to my background and my passion for cooking." Mrs. Bellamy nodded thoughtfully, her gaze shifting to Charles. "And how have these changes been received?" Charles hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Well, the feedback has been positive. But I still believe it risks altering the Bellamy's brand. We've worked hard to build a reputation, and I don't want to jeopardize that." Mrs. Bellamy turned to Leonardo, a spark of intrigue in her eyes. "And what do you have to say to that, Chef Brooks?" Leonardo met her gaze, his voice strong and resolute. "I believe that Bellamy's could embrace more than one kind of excellence. The changes I've made have been well received because they add depth, authenticity, and warmth to the dishes. They connect with our guests in a way that goes beyond traditional flavors. I believe that's what makes food memorable." Mrs. Bellamy considered his words, then spoke, addressing the entire room. "I, for one, have been impressed by the impact Chef Brooks's additions have had on our patrons. I'm always interested in evolving, not just maintaining tradition." She looked pointedly at Charles and Peter. "A restaurant that never changes will eventually lose relevance. Chef Brooks has my full support in continuing to innovate and bring his unique perspective to Bellamy's menu." Charles's face paled as he realized Mrs. Bellamy's stance, but Peter wasn't finished. "Mrs. Bellamy, with all due respect, this could create inconsistency in our dishes. What if guests expect the same flavors every time they return? Mrs. Bellamy gave Peter a cool, measured look. Peter, Bellamy's is more than a collection of recipes. It's an experience. And experiences evolve. She paused, letting her words settle. Chef Brooks's vision is part of that evolution. There was no more room for argument. With Mrs. Bellamy's approval, Leonardo had won a victory he hadn't expected. The subtle hostility that had followed him since his first day now felt less daunting, as he had the support of the very person whose name graced the restaurant's sign. As the meeting ended, the staff dispersed, whispering amongst themselves. Sarah beamed at Leonardo, giving him a discreet thumbs-up before returning to her duties. He felt a sense of triumph that was hard to contain, but he also knew that this wasn't the end of the battle. His colleagues, especially Peter and Charles, wouldn't accept his success easily. Later that night, as he closed up the kitchen, Mrs. Bellamy approached him one last time. She gave him a knowing smile, her gaze warm but serious. "Chef Brooks, you've earned your place here tonight. But you'll need to stay resilient. You've proven yourself, but change doesn't come easy for everyone. Stand by your vision, and you'll do great things." Leonardo nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "Thank you, Mrs. Bellamy. I won't let you down." As she walked away, Leonardo looked around the empty kitchen, his mind already racing with ideas. The reveal had been his biggest test yet, and he had come through with more support than he could have hoped for. He knew the road ahead would still be difficult, but he was prepared to continue challenging the status quo. This was his kitchen now, and he was ready to make it his own. Chapter 8: A New Path. The days following Mrs. Bellamy's public endorsement marked a transformative shift for Leonardo at Bellamy's. For the first time since he had started, Leonardo felt a true sense of belonging in the kitchen. Guests now requested his signature lamb with the sunset blend by name, and reviews began to pour in, praising Bellamy's for the bold new flavors that added depth to its traditional cuisine. Buoyed by the positive feedback, Mrs. Bellamy encouraged Leonardo to continue experimenting, to bring more of his heritage and unique vision to the menu. It was an invitation Leonardo had dreamed of, a chance to truly express himself in every dish. But Leonardo knew that the acceptance he had gained from Mrs. Bellamy and the patrons was just the beginning. The kitchen staff, especially Charles and Peter, still held lingering resentment. He could feel it in the clipped conversations, the cold glances, and the occasional whispers that quieted as he walked by. Charles was especially distant, barely engaging with Leonardo and avoiding any discussion of his culinary choices. Peter, though defeated, still threw occasional jabs, muttering under his breath about unnecessary experiments and losing Bellamy's classic touch. For Leonardo, the success was bittersweet. He had fought hard for his place, but he couldn't ignore the tension simmering beneath the surface. Despite the challenges, however, he remained focused on the future. Sarah, his steadfast ally, continued to support him, offering encouragement during their late-night chats after each shift. Her words reminded him that he wasn't alone in his vision, that change, though uncomfortable, was necessary. One evening, as Leonardo prepared a new lineup of dishes for an upcoming special event, Mrs. Bellamy entered the kitchen. She observed his work quietly before approaching him with a thoughtful look. "Chef Brooks," she began, her tone soft but serious, "I've been watching how your dishes are transforming our guests' experiences here. I know it hasn't been easy, but you've proven that Bellamy's can embrace something new and thrive because of it." She paused, a glint of excitement in her eyes. "I want to give you something beyond just creative freedom here. I want you to launch a signature tasting menu, your own seasonal, evolving menu that showcases your vision." Leonardo's heart raced as he took in her words. A tasting menu of his own design? He had always dreamed of such an opportunity but never imagined it would happen at Bellamy's. "Thank you, Mrs. Bellamy," he said, his voice thick with gratitude. "I can't tell you how much this means to me. I promise to make it unforgettable." She smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "I have no doubt you will, Chef Brooks. The city deserves to see what you're truly capable of." And if anyone can bring this vision to life, it's you. With renewed energy, Leonardo threw himself into creating the tasting menu. He spent the following days sourcing fresh, unique ingredients and designing each course with meticulous care. He worked late into the night, testing flavors, refining textures, and experimenting with plating, determined to create a dining experience that would leave a lasting impression. The final menu was an exploration of his heritage, combining French techniques with Caribbean, Southern, and African influences. The tasting menu opened with a chilled watermelon and ginger gazpacho, paired with a toasted cornbread crumble, a tribute to his grandmother's love of cornbread and fresh summer fruits. The second course was a delicate plantain gnocchi with a thyme-infused brown butter, honoring both his family's Caribbean roots and his culinary training. For the main course, he served slow-roasted pork shoulder glazed with guava and habanero, balanced with a side of creamy collard green puree and pickled okra. The meal ended with a smoky chocolate mousse, infused with a touch of cayenne and topped with caramelized pineapple and a sprinkle of sea salt, a complex, spicy sweet dessert that left guests in awe. The tasting menu quickly became the talk of the city. Food critics praised it as a masterful blend of tradition and innovation, while guests eagerly shared photos and glowing reviews on social media. Even longtime patrons, who had initially expressed hesitation about the changes at Bellamy's, found themselves returning for Leonardo's new creations, drawn to the bold flavors and the warmth that came with every dish. Through it all, Leonardo felt both vindicated and humbled. He had fought for the opportunity to bring his story and his culture to the plate, and now it was paying off. Yet, he remained aware of the challenges he had faced to reach this point. Bellamy's had been a place of trial, testing not only his skill but his strength of character. He couldn't ignore the fact that there were other talented chefs out there who faced similar battles, who struggled to find acceptance and respect in kitchens reluctant to embrace anything untraditional. One evening, after a particularly successful dinner service, Sarah approached him with an idea. "Leo, have you thought about mentoring other chefs? There are so many out there who could benefit from your experience, who might not have the courage to stand up for their vision like you did." Leonardo considered her words, a new sense of purpose taking shape in his mind. "You're right, Sarah. I know how hard it is to break through, especially when you feel like an outsider." He paused, a thoughtful smile spreading across his face. "Maybe it's time to create something that helps others find their voice, too." In the weeks that followed, Leonardo took on a handful of young chefs as ments, teaching them the importance of resilience, creativity, and staying true to their roots. He encouraged them to embrace their unique backgrounds, to see them not as obstacles but as strengths. Bellamy's began hosting monthly culinary workshops, where aspiring chefs from diverse backgrounds could learn from Leonardo and experiment with their own flavors and ideas. The workshops became an immediate hit, drawing attention from across the industry and fostering an environment of inclusivity and collaboration. Months passed, and Bellamy's evolved into a place that welcomed diverse influences and fresh ideas. It became known not just for its excellence, but for its willingness to take risks and embrace innovation. Charles and Peter, who had once stood as barriers to Leonardo's success, quietly stepped aside, their resistance overshadowed by the restaurant's thriving reputation and the overwhelming approval from Mrs. Bellamy herself. Leonardo's journey was far from over, but he knew he had found his true path. He had transformed Bellamy's, but more importantly, he had transformed himself. He had faced prejudice and exclusion, yet he had emerged stronger, with a clearer sense of purpose and a commitment to inspiring others. Standing in Bellamy's kitchen one evening after service, Leonardo looked around, a quiet smile playing on his lips. The restaurant felt different now. It felt alive, open, a place where every chef had the freedom to bring their own story to the table. He had created a space that wasn't just about food, but about connection, resilience, and the courage to follow one's passion. For Leonardo, this was only the beginning of his new path. He had found his voice, and now he was determined to help others find theirs. As he looked out at the empty dining room, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that he was finally where he was meant to be, a chef with a story to tell and a legacy to build. Leonardo Brooks' journey is not simply a tale of culinary ambition, it's a story of bold defiance, a pursuit to break through walls built by convention and prejudice. For Leonardo, food is more than flavor and technique, it's a statement, a reflection of his identity, his heritage, and the world he believes in. He doesn't just prepare meals, he infuses each dish with his culture and vision, bringing his personal story into a kitchen that would rather preserve the status quo than embrace the richness of diversity. From his first day at Bellamy's, Leonardo faced subtle but unyielding resistance, a silent wall of indifference and judgment that told him he didn't quite belong. But he didn't let it break him. Instead, he took it as a challenge, a call to prove that his voice and his heritage deserve a place on the same stage as any traditional cuisine. Each day, he put his reputation, his dreams, and his spirit on the line to create something original, a cuisine that boldly merged his roots with a vision for the future. Leonardo's courage and resilience aren't just admirable, they are an inspiration for anyone who has ever felt the weight of societal expectations pressing down on their dreams. His journey reminds us that the road to meaningful change is rarely smooth. Often, it's a path filled with unseen obstacles, and different faces, and countless moments that test our resolve. But for Leonardo, every dish is a declaration, an insistence on his right to stand tall and leave his mark. In the end, Leonardo's story shows us that real impact comes not just from having skill, but from the courage to stay true to who you are. It's about the power to challenge the norms and the audacity to rewrite the rules, even when others would rather see you stay silent. His journey is a powerful reminder that change isn't always welcomed, but sometimes that makes it all the more necessary.